Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Every week for, a lot of years now, I've had this opportunity to bring into your homes the stories of men and women who, in their love for our Lord Jesus Christ, found their hearts and minds open to the beauty of the church. And often, for many of the guests, it was the last thing they ever thought would happen to them. And I'm wondering if that might be true for our guest tonight. We often have many guests from similar denominational backgrounds. You'll see often a lot of Baptists and maybe former Anglicans, former Lutherans, former Presbyterians on this program over the years. But there are a few traditions that we end up just having a few from, and maybe for good reasons. I mean, we might talk about that, or maybe not necessarily good reasons, but for understandable reasons. Mm-hmm. And tonight is that case. Our guest tonight is Lou Everett. He's a former Jehovah Witness. And we haven't had that many former Jehovah Witnesses on the program, so it's always good to have someone from that tradition talk about the beauty of coming home to the church. It's a
pleasure, thank you.
So Lou, it's great to have you join us on the program. And I would guess probably I was right in that becoming Catholic was not something you thought would probably happen to you when you were young.
No, not at all. Wasn't even an inkling in my mind.
Now, were you brought up Jehovah's Witness?
At the age of 9, my parents decided to be baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses. Previous to that, they did study, so.
Okay, well, I'll back you up even farther. We'll go back to what kind of family traditions then do you bring into your walk of faith?
Right, well, my mom and dad both are cradle Catholics.
Okay.
Initially. And their foundation, my dad was in the military, and my mom was always a very religious type of person, so the foundation of Christ and being Christian was always a big part of our family life growing up. Now, we didn't have the prayer before meals and things like that, but we had values. Yep. And up till that age of 9 when our family made a big transition, but that value was still there.
You were traveling a lot, so were you hitting Mass every Sunday, or?
No, unfortunately, my parents didn't go to Mass at all.
Okay.
Even though they were cradle Catholics, they had fallen away later in life and never really went to church. So as a young person and as a child, never had an experience with going to a Catholic church at all.
And probably very little religious training.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there were the values that will continue on at least for a generation or two after people quit practicing.
That's right.
Their faith. It's still there as the culture of your youth. Yeah. But so let's say before your Jehovah Witness stage, where was God in your life?
Well, I always had a power there. I always felt like I had a spiritual charge, if you will. Yeah. What it was called at that age, I would have had no idea, but I always was drawn to something spiritual. Okay. And I give a lot of credit to my mom for that. She had that spirituality essence in her, but nothing structural.
All right.
But I felt it.
But then age 9, how did that happen? I mean, there they are not. I mean, what happened?
Yeah, it was a period of time, I think. I mean, being that mom and dad, we moved around a lot because dad being in the military. And each place that we went to, whether it be we went to Hawaii and other different states in the country, there was times that they were approached by Jehovah's Witnesses. And throughout those times, they would study with them. My mom had that longing for spirituality, and so they were there when she had that longing. Yeah. And so they were studied on and off through all the different places we went to. And then in Indianapolis, my dad was stationed in Fort Benjamin Harrison. Okay. And it was at that time when they seemed to become a little bit more aware of the need for that spiritual essence in the family and having God first in the family. And that's when they made that decision to fully give themselves to the organization known as the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Can you identify what it was about the Jehovah Witness, their message, that was convincing enough to your parents that they would give up their Catholic roots and make that jump? And what was it?
Jehovah's Witnesses are very giving. They're very honest people, and they are Christian at its base. They do have a Christian way about them. They want to serve God in the right way, be Christians, act as Christ acted. They would give up anything to help somebody. Yeah. And at that moment of spiritual crisis, they were there. And there were times that they had helped my mom and helped my parents be able to come to some realization of their spirituality and just being a friend. And it was that Christian attitude that really drew my family into that faith because of the fact that we felt that we were seeing a real Christian attitude.
Because there's a real, and I've not had that much personal involvement
Sure.
with Jehovah's Witnesses, admittedly. But yet the one thing I do know about it, they're always there at your door. I mean, they're coming to you, they're evangelizing, they're bringing, they're showing, they care, they want to be there. They want you to be involved in the church.
That's right. That is correct. And that's a major focus of our faith as Jehovah's Witnesses. When I was a Jehovah's Witness, that's what we were taught to do. We were trained on how to do that. Our meetings were focused on teaching and evangelizing our faith to those that may have been spiritually sick.
Did you very freely yourself then at what, age 9 you said, became a part of this? You liked it?
Well, it was a turning point because, mind you, the religious portion of it, to have Jesus Christ and loving God, that was something that felt natural for me.
Yeah.
As a 9-year-old, the unnatural things about it were sacrificing some of the holidays that I was so used to, such as Christmas and Halloween, and which aren't really a major impact on an adult, but for a child, I was confused, but was obviously 9 years old, and that was what Mom and Dad said to do. We're going to do it, and I have no regrets at all. And that's so it was a very interesting transition, but I could feel the Spirit working even at 9.
Yeah. Yeah.
We did go door to door. We went out, we call it in service. We go out in service on Saturdays and Sundays after we went to the Kingdom Hall. And so we did things like that as a family. So as a family, we brought each other together, and that really appealed to me as a child because it didn't seem that we were that close together up until that point as a family.
Most of us who've not had Jehovah's Witness involvement have no idea what happens in a Kingdom Hall. Mm-hmm. So there you are as a young 9-year-old. How long did it take before your parents were entrusted with the responsibility to go out and witness? Is that very quickly?
Well, not really. There is a process that you go through as a Jehovah's Witness, which makes sense, and I think that's a very good thing for any faith, really, to just entrust somebody with the faith to go out and teach until you really understand it. And my mom and dad went through a process of going to their meetings and learning about the doctrine of the faith and learning our history of Jehovah's Witnesses, learning how to preach. And before you're baptized, you can still go out and preach. So they teach you this first, and they go through a period of questioning in a way, where you learn the things that you need to learn. And when you feel comfortable enough, and when the elders of the congregation feel that you have a grasp on it, then you're able to become what they call an unbaptized publisher, or one who can go out and evangelize with the remainder of the group.
Okay.
And they were able to do that.
So what's the baptism phase?
The baptism phase depends on the person. Sometimes it's someone like my mom and dad who are adults. It could take a person 6 months. It could take them a year or 2 years, depending on how their life was and how they've been able to conform and change their life to become a Christian. And so for my parents, it took quite a few years from the time they began studying, when I was younger, up until I was 9 or 10 years old when they were baptized. So, and that's the baptism phase. They go through questions about their faith, and they need to be able to defend their faith before they can take that step.
Okay.
Very much like the RCIA program in our church. You had to be able to feel like you can defend the faith and understand the faith, and that's what they needed to do. And once they did that, they were able to go on ahead, and they felt that this was the way to raise the family. This was the way to give us that foundation.
Is baptism an entrance into the church then, or is it seen as a spiritual rejuvenation, as a conversion?
It's both. It's an entrance into the church in a way, where you're able to gain more responsibilities in the church, the things that you can do in the Kingdom Hall, things that you can do as far as responsibilities, like go out and full-time evangelize, or different responsibilities you can take on. Baptism was the main first move that shows publicly that you have decided that this is the faith that you want to follow, that you want to put the old way behind you and focus on being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. The preaching aspect of it, however, is the primary. That was first, before the baptism. Understanding and learning how to evangelize was before we actually made that step to being baptized. I did the same thing. My parents gave that to me. So as a 9, 10-year-old, I was out with them, and we were evangelizing and talking to our friends at school, and that was a big part of us as Jehovah's Witnesses, is evangelizing and showing people where what we call the truth is.
Now, is the meeting at the Jehovah Witness, is it a worship meeting, or is it more of an educational training meeting?
That's a very good question, and they call them meetings, and I think validly. There's not really a worship service in a Kingdom Hall. A lot of it's teaching. Now, it's not to say that people don't worship while they're there, but there's no kneeling. There's no, any kind of that moment where you and God have that quiet time. You open with prayer and a song, and then there's the teaching aspect of the meeting, whether we're going over a publication that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society put out, and usually there'll be like a book study or their Watchtower on a Sunday, and then there might be a public talk on a Sunday as well, where it'll be a sermon type, like an hour. But most of it's teaching. It's about an awareness of the world around us. But there's not really a worship service that really takes place like we do in our church.
You mentioned it was about the Watchtower, so is that meeting then, in a way, equipping the people to take that Watchtower and then go out?
That's correct. And that's exactly what it is. Our focus as a Jehovah's Witness was to teach other people what we believe. So we need to understand the fullness of our faith and our doctrine before we can teach somebody else and save them. And that's what all those meetings were. The Watchtower, it would sometimes would come up with family issues, so the study was about family, but we would take that knowledge and utilize that to be able to go out in the ministry and preach the good news to others. Okay. And that was the goal, really, was to go out and do that.
Another question in my mind. Oh boy, what was it there? Well, first, you're buying all this as a young man.
Sure, up to a point.
Oh, I know what it was. In some of those preparations, is there distinct apologetic training in the distinctions between the Jehovah Witness doctrines and non-Jehovah Witness doctrines?
Absolutely. Publication after publication that we utilize constantly to be able to understand men's religions and different religions on the earth. We have publication about men's religions. And there was years ago, there was a book. There's different ones now, but years ago when I was younger, there was a book called Reasoning from the Scriptures. And that was a very common book that we utilized in the ministry to be able to say, somebody says, well, I'm Catholic. Why is it that you don't do the sign of the cross? Well, we were able to take that book, utilize that information along with the scriptural references as an apologetic standpoint, and preach to that individual and show them and back up and stand up for our faith.
Okay. Using the scriptures.
Using the scriptures as it was presented.
Yeah, all right.
That's correct.
All right. And there you were as a young man, and training to be one of these leaders, right?
That's correct. My goal was to be a full-time pioneer, they called it, a full-time minister, and be 90 plus hours in the field ministry every single month, which is what I wanted to do. That's what I was geared to do. I had a desire to work with children, work with young people at my age, to understand the difficulties that we're all going through, and to preach the good news. That's what I wanted to do. And so we're definitely trained to do that, and that was a passion of mine.
And your parents were both sold out?
I
hate to use that phrase.
I know
really
what you mean. They were
committed to that.
That's correct. Our family was a strongly dedicated family, and as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, our family was a Christian family that lived the faith. There were obviously every family has their odds and ends that happen at home, but we lived our faith at home. We said prayer at dinner time. We ate dinner as a family. We did everything we could to have a Bible study as a family. We did all those things that would not just live out our faith while we're at the meeting. We would live out our faith at home and during the day as Christians. So yeah, my parents were sold on it. This was our way of life.
Okay.
This was us.
Maybe just a clarification, because you use the word Christian. So as a Jehovah Witness, you didn't so much call yourselves Jehovah Witnesses as Christians, and the rest were man's religions?
Well, yeah, very good point. And our main calling was we are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and as a Jehovah's Witness, the belief is that God's name is Jehovah. Jesus is separate than God, and Jesus was the Son of God, but they're separate. But we as Jehovah's Witnesses are the true Christians. While others claim to be Christians, and they may show that they're Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses are the true Christians. They're the ones that, if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, then you're not a true Christian.
Okay. Well, at some point, we're going to have to clarify what were the unique Jehovah Witness beliefs versus Catholic beliefs. I'm not sure now's the time.
Sure.
Or do you want to go later? I mean, what would be...
Well, that's up to you. We could certainly hit a couple of points here and there if you'd like.
So talking as a Jehovah Witness, because that's where the stage you're at,
Sure.
what would you say are the key unique doctrines of the Jehovah Witness that would set it apart from Catholic Christians and then non-Catholic Christians?
Sure. Well, what sets Jehovah's Witnesses apart at this moment is that a couple of things. It's ran by what we call a governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, and Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is that governing organization that kind of spearheads and continues the Jehovah's Witnesses organization moving. They're the publishing entity, and there's also what's called a governing body, which are a group of men who have been chosen to make the major decisions and influence on the rest of the organization. That's where the publishing of the Watchtower comes from, and the publishing of some of the books and some of the changing of doctrine over time comes from. And with that, there's no questioning. If we take something that we read and we're not too sure if it matches biblically, we're not supposed to question.
So whatever comes printed in the Watchtower.
That's it.
So it's the group in, New York?
Correct.
Right? That they're the ones, whoever's there, decides the truth of what then is disseminated through all the different kingdom halls around the country.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's one major difference, that the questioning and it doesn't happen. We can't really question our faith.
Okay.
Which is common in some faiths. On a basic level, on our Christianity level, the major difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and us as Catholics is that Jesus Christ and God are not the same person. We as Catholics understand and realize the divinity of Christ. Without it, we don't have our faith. Jehovah's Witnesses call on one divinity, and that's Jehovah. Jesus is separate. The Father and the Son are separate, which we as Catholics believe that they are separate.
Three persons in one God.
Exactly.
Right.
The Trinity is something that they utilize to teach against Catholicism, because Jehovah's Witnesses are not in any way, shape, or form a believer in the Trinity.
Yeah.
They are not Trinitarian at all. As a matter of fact, they utilize that with their understanding of Scripture to show that Catholicism and any other Trinitarian religion is completely aside from true Christianity.
So they're not even adoptionist in the sense of taking a human man and divinizing him.
Correct.
In that heresy.
That's correct.
They would not even see Jesus have been divinized at all.
That's correct.
Just a good prophet, a good teacher?
The Son of God, and someone who came to sacrifice his life for us and to set an example for us, almost like a brother.
Okay.
That's where it stands. And to set an example and give us that outline. So with that, it's very similar. To us as Catholics, we know that that example he gave us is what should be the basis of our faith. But to them, that's where it ends.
Resurrection?
There is a resurrection, but on the earth. The resurrection in heaven is only for a very small group of people. Revelation talks about 144,000 divided from all the different 12 tribes of Israel. They take the number 144,000 as a literal number of those chosen of only Jehovah's Witnesses that are going to go to heaven. That's their heavenly reward. The rest are going to have their reward here on the earth when the earth is turned into a paradise. So there's a big difference there as well. The heavenly reward is very limited. There's almost like a cutoff. So we go to Mass every Sunday. We get to enjoy absorbing the body and blood of Christ. You and I as brothers, we can do that as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Once a year, we have what's called a memorial, where we memorialize the event of Jesus' death and resurrection. And while we sit there, the plate of the bread is passed and the wine is passed, none of which of us can take it. Only those who have deciphered on their own throughout years of deciphering that they are part of that 144,000 anointed group. They're the only ones that have the ability to take it.
Oh, I've not heard it put this way before. So it isn't one of the leaders of the Kingdom Hall that determines you're one of the 144? It's a person themselves?
Person themselves generally will do that. And if there's a lot of times, there's a lot of questioning involved, because when I was baptized at 13, I made my profession at 13 as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was baptized. Soon thereafter, I felt the desire to partake of the blood and body of Christ. I just had this desire, and I felt that if that's the case, I must be part of this anointed group if I'm drawn to take part in this sacrifice. So I approach the elders of my congregation and say, I'm really I'm drawn to this. And unfortunately, they kind of says, well, maybe you're maybe too young to decipher that. Maybe you're just too young for that. Most of them have already been chosen. Those kinds of things were. So I didn't want to confuse other people. And you're doing it in public. So if you make that profession, people know about it and it becomes a talk. And so I didn't want to really offend anybody either. Oh. And so I just took that as it was. But that memorial once a year, that's another huge difference, is that sacrifice that you and I serve at our Mass every day. I did not have that.
Yeah.
Didn't have the ability to even touch it.
Were there very many in your little local that?
My congregation in Indianapolis at the time, at that point, there was one in our congregation that I knew of. And, he's known it for years, and I talked to him about it.
Yeah.
And he just knew, he said. And so he had that drawing too, and I really, to this day, I believe that drawing into the body of Christ has nothing to do with your faith and religion. It has everything to do with the Holy Spirit saying this is where it's at.
Now, the Jehovah Witnesses are also kind of an Adventist group, right? I mean, end of the world perspective.
Correct.
How was that as a part of your?
Yes, and that's also a major part. It's like a lot of things. There's a beginning and there's an end. Sure. And as Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society for years has been attempted to predict that great tribulation that Revelation talks about in Armageddon, and what are the signs. And there's been multiple predictions over the years from other faiths, but Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, years that just 1914 was a big one, and that's a big culmination in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. They use that date as a very significant date in history to determine an awful lot of their beliefs. And 1914 was a predicted day. Predicted year of the end of the world. So the idea is that when the end of the world comes, God is going to say, if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and you're not in my good graces, you're gone. Dead forever. No hell. There is no hell. You're dead forever. It's tough because there's not a lot of forgiveness at that point. It doesn't seem. But they're definitely an end of the world religion.
And those that end up in heaven or on this earth or dead, it's determined by membership in the society. Is it determined by a life of works? Or is it God's chosen grace, just selecting?
It's chosen works. It's all about works. This is what you do.
Okay.
Jehovah's Witnesses is a very sola scriptura, only scripture type of religion, they say. Yeah. But they only base everything they believe on. If it's not in the Bible, we can't believe it. And that interpretation comes from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So what they translate it is what it means. So that is kind of decided based on what you're a part of. It's all about your works. Are you out preaching? Are you evangelizing? Are you a Christian in your own everyday life? Which has value. Works is a major part of us as Christians, and so that value there really instilled into me that was part of the value.
But again, as you say, you as a young man, your parents in their local Kingdom Hall, when that Jehovah Witness, the Watchtower is read, and it's infallible, right?
Correct.
The people who are writing that are at some office in New York City, I think.
Correct.
Who determines who gets into that group of folk that decide? Do you get a say at the local church, or are they considered voted at some point, or are they hired? Or
there's a process. Now the deep process I'm not aware of, but it's an elected in. They're asked to be part of that governing body, and they need to be part of that anointed group that are ones going to heaven.
Okay.
So those that are going to heaven are the anointed, and so there's a selected, chosen few of those anointed that are part of that governing body, including the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is also one of those chosen anointed ones, aside from the other 144,000 since the beginning of time that have been selected supposedly.
Now, we're going to take a break in just a second, but so most of what you've taught us about Jehovah's Witnesses, the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses would know. Or is there also a sense in which at different levels as you grow in the organization, you get more information about how the organization works?
Well, the majority of what I talk about, they'll know.
Okay.
And but as you grow in any faith, you learn more. But the things that I talked about are things that you will learn before you're baptized. Generally, these are things we need to know and understand. That this is the group we're going to be a part of. This is how God works. This is who Jehovah is. All the basic part of our makeup as one of Jehovah's Witnesses is taught before we make that public declaration.
Okay, Lou. Well, it's time for a break. We'll come back and we'll probably hear about now how your eyes are opened in a different way to see about the need to come home. So we'll be with you in a bit. Right back in a moment. See you back. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest this evening is Lou Everett, former Jehovah's Witness. Let me tell you a couple things. First of all, he has a website, www.ourcatholicconversion.com, in case you want to ask him some questions. And also to mention, if you go to the Coming Home Network's website, chnetwork.org, your conversion story is written out there in case someone wants. Is it on your website too?
Yeah, I believe I have linked it. I've linked it to yours. That's
okay,
correct.
Good. So that way, in case the audience wants have more details about your journey,
sure
they can get
thing.
it.
Yes, absolutely.
Because time always flies on the journey.
Yes, it does.
So we've had a good time in the first half to go into more detail about the Jehovah's Witness experience. Mm-hmm. All right, what happened?
A lot. There's a lot that happened at that point. I continued on in my Jehovah's Witness faith, and at age of 18, I decided I wanted to be the full-time minister of Jehovah's Witnesses, so a full-time pioneer, and that's which entails 90 hours plus a month, door-to-door Bible studying, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I worked with a lot of the deaf individuals of our community. Mm-hmm. So I did a lot of interpreting and sign language Bible studies with the deaf. And that was a rewarding for me to teach somebody the truth of what I believed. So I did that, and then after high school, I continued on, and I met a girl who I married, who was also one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And we got married, and we were full-time ministers together. At the age of 22, 21, we were pregnant with our first child, my son, and that was a major changing point in my life, because now I had not just people I was teaching, but now I had a child that I had to teach and give him the foundation of faith as well. And when he was born, I wasn't sure if this is what I wanted to teach my son. I started having questions that maybe my son would have, but I've always been interested in different ideas behind religion and faith. So it just drew it out, having my son there. So, and over time,
I was going to say that isn't uncommon, because even in the Catholic Church, often it's when the couple has their first children that they start coming back to church.
Yes.
So that's understandable.
Yeah, it's a change. Exactly. It's something that changes your life for many ways. So at that point, I had questions and as I mentioned before, you don't really question what you're taught as a Jehovah's Witness. It's looked down upon, really. If you question too much, it looks as if you're trying to apostatize against the church, against the faith. So I never did that. But at this point, it was time for me to get answers to things that I had, like the divinity of Christ. Why is it that the Bible shows the worship of Jesus Christ, but we as Jehovah's Witnesses show something different, and yet quote some of those scriptures and leave some out? And those are questions that I had and I brought to the elders of my congregation, of which I was told it was very interesting questions, and had the Bible folded up and given back to me and said, hold on to those questions. Never got answers to those things from inside the Kingdom Hall or inside the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So I decided to take a break. I needed to find out for myself. Now at this point, I'm a full-time pioneer. I'm also a ministerial servant in the congregation where I served, which is very similar to a deacon, serves the elders. But I needed to take a break to find out where my spirituality needed to go. There was something missing. I didn't feel like I had fullness. There was something there. It was a hole that I had felt for a long time, but finally been able to question it. So I took a break from faith. I wanted to just take the Bible and do my studying and do my research. So I went out and I got the strongest concordance of the Bible, and I've got the books here and books there, and trying to understand the different translations of the Bible. So I began, because as a Jehovah's Witness, you have your own translation. It's the New World Translation. Then it is quite different on some things, and other things it's the foundation's there. So I began to do all this research and study on my own, and I just got to the point where I was just unsure of where my faith was. And while I was on that...
I was going to say, part of that problem is that the Bible alone, regardless of what translation, if you're not guided, there are hundreds of verses that could take you in 100 different directions.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's what it was doing. That's exactly what it was doing. It was taking me in all different directions, and I just didn't know which direction to go. And I knew that there was a right direction, but what was it? I had no idea. And at that point is when, during that break, I was contacted by one of the elders of the congregation that I was supposed to be going to, that said, hey, because I had moved, and so he said, hey, I know that you're in the area and we wanted to come see you again. And as a friend of mine, he had married me and my current wife at the time. And so he was a real close friend, almost like a father figure at that point. And so I had him come over, we had coffee, and he says, hey, why don't we talk about the questions you have? I'm like, this is a great opportunity. I felt almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I can now maybe get some answers. So I shared with him all the questions that I had: the divinity of Christ, the value of Mary, the difference between Jehovah and the God of Christianity. What is all these things? How are they going to blend with what I'm believing and what I think? Yeah. And what was missing? What is it that I was missing about this whole thing? So I laid it all out for him, and he says, those are great questions. Maybe we should just start doing Bible studies together again. So I felt, this is great. I can start over. I can regenerate my spirituality. And so he left, and I gave him a hug, as my brother did. And a couple of days later, I get a call from elders at the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, mind you. They're at Bethel, they call it, that were from that local congregation. And they had called me and said, based on my conversation with this brother, it was obvious that I did no longer want it to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that they had to disassociate me from the organization. So at that point, it was critical. Now I had nothing. The fishing line was pulled out, I had nothing. So now I've been removed from an organization that all I've known since I was 9, the only religious foundation I've had. And if you don't know anything about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and one of Jehovah's Witnesses, when they choose to leave the organization, or they're pushed out, if there's fellowshipped, I shouldn't say pushed out, because some people do things they shouldn't do, but if they're disfellowshipped or disassociated by them, you're shunned. Nobody talks to you. You're not supposed to mingle with people that are doing those things, supposedly. And so that included my parents, it included my brother and my sister, and anybody I knew from the time I was 9 years old.
Really? Whoa.
So anyone that I was associated with as a Jehovah's Witness no longer was an acquaintance of mine at that exact moment in time. So waking up the next day, not having any friends, was difficult.
So they took it seriously, your parents?
Very
your
much
sisters.
so.
Wife?
My wife at the time, she was kind of on my side there a little bit. Yeah. She was iffy. she understood the questions, but she kind of took a back seat.
Yeah.
So she wasn't going either. We took a break. So at that time, she wasn't going either.
Okay.
But my family took it very seriously. So a couple years went by. My parents wouldn't talk to me, and I didn't have a lot of contact with them, which that's what they believed, and I give them a lot of props for that. That's their faith, and they, But to fast forward a tad, throughout that, I got myself involved in things that I shouldn't have because I gave up on faith. That kind of shot me down a little bit. It gave me a stab right in the heart with, here I am talking and praying to God, trying to do the right thing, trying to find my path, and someone just tore it away from me. Yeah. So I began into a spiral of, maybe Christianity is just wrong. Maybe this is just not the right way. So I began to dabble in things like Wicca and Buddhism and Hinduism and paganism, things outside the Christian faith all the way around. And every single time I still had that hole. There was still something missing. There was still something I was drawn to that I didn't have and didn't know where to go. And that was just not fulfilling enough for me. And at the same time, because of how I was feeling, my family starts falling apart. You don't have God in the center of your family starts falling apart. I got involved in metal rock bands. I was in a band and got involved in that atmosphere and dabbled in drugs and marijuana use, alcohol, and that wasn't the only reason, but that helped with failing of that marriage, and I ended up getting a divorce 10 years into that marriage.
Oh, okay.
So that was another pivotal point of my journey, was that divorce.
So when that happened, you weren't involved with any churches?
None at all.
All right.
I was out flying around doing nothing. And matter of fact, I had a very very strong hatred against Christianity and the Catholic Church and Jehovah's Witnesses. I started anti-Jehovah's Witness websites and things that I'm not necessarily proud of because I don't think that it's advantageous.
Yeah.
But
yet it sounds like you were still dabbling in spiritual things.
Yes.
And there was still the recognition of something.
That longing was there.
Yeah.
It was a hole. Like it just got bigger and bigger, and it just no matter what I did, I couldn't fill it. And and then after a couple of years, a year or so after my divorce, I met a woman named Sherry, who I married, who's my wife now, who was cradle Catholic. And seeing her spirituality and how strong attached she was to her church really had an impact on me. And during that time, we had gone out and got married within a couple of years. She wanted to get married in the church. I loved her, so we're going to get married in the church. I was kind of hesitant about this whole getting married in the Catholic Church thing, being from a Jehovah's Witness perspective, anti-Catholic pretty much. And so we went and sat down with the priest, Father Toomey. I'll have to say his name because he was just a major pivotal person in my life at that time. Helped us with our pre-wedding counseling. Very mild priest, listened to me. I was able to get everything off my chest about all my questions about faith and religion, and he understood them all. No judging, no judgmental. If he didn't have the answer, he said, I don't know. And I'll find out. So saying I don't know to something is okay. And that finally was that moment where I says, I don't have to know everything. It's okay not to have an answer. We're never going to fully understand. So that there brought us then to the wedding. We got married and at a wonderful wedding. Father Toomey just made a beautiful wedding for us, and that inspired us. My family came to that.
Really?
So by this point, my parents have kind of come around to accept the fact that I'm no longer a Jehovah's Witness, and they come around to be able to accept the fact that, okay, this is your choice, we'll respect it. So I was able to talk to them and repair that relationship a little bit. So that was a blessing from God, being able to happen.
Were you active in faith at all yet?
No.
Okay.
I was a reader. Avid reader. Always been an avid reader. I would read anything somebody gave me. If it was about Mormonism, I'd read it. If it was about Buddhism, I'd read it. I was very open to spirituality. So the spirituality was something that always was a part of my life, and my wife was a big influence on that because she talked about her faith, but not in a way that made me feel inferior or it didn't feel forced. And that was calming. So a couple of years into our marriage, well, I guess I should back up a tad. The priest that married us said one day, he says, I got a gift for you. We showed up for our little meeting. I said, okay. He hands me the book. It's Teachings of Christ, and it was the adult catechism for adults. I said, all right. He goes, listen, I don't expect you to read it or anything. There's no expectation, but just take it. I want to give it to you. So he gave it to me, and I went home, and I shoved it in my nightstand and buried it. Like I did anything I didn't really want to read. So a couple of years after we were married, I was out partying with some friends, and my wife and I were out, and I had drank too much, which was a commonality of mine at the time. Anyone that knows me at that time knows that that's what I did. And so I drank myself into an oblivion and passed out, standing up, walking to my car, ended up with a grade 3 concussion the next day, and not remembering the whole day at all. Realizing that I have just upset my wife. She was panicked. I couldn't remember anything. And the doctor said I should have been in a coma. And I didn't know what to do with that. Yeah. I didn't know what to do with that. But I couldn't work for 2 weeks. He said, I got to take time off to deal with this concussion. So when my time off, what am I going to do? I've read everything in my house. But then I remembered this book that was given to me by my father 3 years previously, the Teachings of Christ, the Adult Catechism for Adults. So I pulled that out, and I started reading it by topic. Because the great thing about the Catechism, it doesn't have to be boring. This book was created on topics, the topics that were concerning of mine, from my upbringing as a Jehovah's Witness. I can look at it and say, oh, the divinity of Christ. Well, where does it say about that? And I can read it and ponder on it. So I took that book and I dissected it. And then in the meantime, EWTN, I started watching your program and other EWTN. I was watching Mass every morning because I didn't have anything else better to do at my time. I wanted to see what it was about. What are they doing? Why are they kneeling here? What is this all about? And everyone's taking the body and blood of Christ. That is appealing to me. It's like, wait a minute, everybody can do this, you know? And so that's what started drawing me into understanding a little bit more that my hole was starting to become a little smaller, and I didn't understand it. And I was a little scared, so I wanted to do things my way, and my way wasn't working. So I told my wife, I said, I really want to start going to Mass with you. And I know that if she were to ask her, she'd say that she didn't want to react, but her mouth probably just dropped to the floor, because that's not something I would have ever done. So we began going to Mass, and then I found out about the RCIA program in our local parish, and started going through that, and that was an amazing journey. During that journey, though, during that RCIA program, there was so many questions that just keeps popping up, because as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're indoctrinated with so many ideas from the Watchtower Society that it governs your entire existence. So when you're learning something contrary, even if it's a statement that's contrary to what you've been taught before, no, that can't be right. Yeah. No matter what evidence or what shows it. And the realization that the Catholic Church has their tradition, the capital T tradition, which means a succession. All of the succession between the apostles and us today, that is what drew me into the church. It made me realize that there's not that gap anymore. Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, along with many other faiths, had a beginning. And then that beginning was way after the apostles. Yeah. And the belief of what happened in between all that. Where is all that stuff that happened? And the idea that it's all written in the Bible just didn't make sense to me. It couldn't all be there. If that was the case, we'd have volumes and volumes. And then I found out about the forefathers of the church. The fathers of the church, there are writings upon writings upon writings that fill walls. And I began reading those. And that's the impressive part about our church, is that connection to the apostles. And that's really what drew me in, is that all those missing pieces started to kind of come together. There's still some missing pieces. We all go through that. But throughout that, my wife was by me 100%. And that's really what made it real to me, that this is the true faith. Through all the things that I have done, putting her through what I put her through with my drunken stupor and going through the concussion and the nights that I went out drinking and partying. And she stuck with me.
Amazing how the Lord uses those kinds of crises so to get our attention.
Yes. I tell my wife, you hit me upside the head, literally. Although I hit myself upside the head, it was my fault.
Well, a couple of the doctrines or practices of the Catholic faith that you would have encountered in reading the adult catechism that would have been radically different than Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, would have been confession.
Yes. And confession is very different in the Catholic Church as it is as a Jehovah's Witness. If you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you sin, you are to confess to your elders, but it's different. You go to a body of elders and you confess your sin, and then they make a decision whether or not they believe that you are sorry for what you've done, and they either disfellowship you or discipline you in some way so that they can protect the rest of the congregation from you.
Well, in general, then, that would not be like a Catholic understanding of sin that you might go to the confession for on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis. This would be a major public sin in the Jehovah's Witnesses' perspective.
In their perspective, yes. I mean, there are some things, as an example.
Otherwise, you wouldn't get the whole committee together.
Right. And their quote-unquote list of things that you don't do as a Jehovah's Witness are very, what we would consider in our church minor. Smoking, celebrating Christmas, because that's not part of the faith.
Getting a blood transfusion.
Getting a blood transfusion, doing it on purpose, like knowing you're getting it, accepting blood transfusions, because that is something that don't do.
So how was your transition then into Catholic confession? How was that for you?
It was hard because growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, there were times that I had to go to the elders and say, oh, I've done something stupid, and have had to, because as a young high schooler, I dabbled in things I shouldn't have, in drugs and things, and they had to kind of correct me. But this time it was more of a fear. How am I going to go, and I can't talk to a priest about what I've done? But it came to realize, when I realized the sacrament value behind it, that there's something about, you're not just confessing, you're repairing. There's a reconciliation happens between your relationship with God and you. It's as if you go and you disappoint my dad or your friend. You go to them and you reconcile that relationship. Whether it's done on purpose or not, that's a reconciliation. And once I got a grasp of that, I realized how much I needed it. Yeah. And how much of a healing power it has. And the priest that I talk to, he's not the one that can forgive me. God forgives me. But he's the man I can talk to, that God has given him. That's a perfect, beautiful example of a gift that our God has given to us.
And when I listen to your story, Lou, it reminds us, I'm not sure it always comes across in the Journey Home program, but one thing we recognize is, especially when you come from a whole different worldview, as you would have as a Jehovah's Witness. Everything, heaven, hell, earth, future, present, who we are as people is such a radically different worldview than the Catholic Church. Yeah. Conversion doesn't happen overnight.
No way.
It's a process. Part of it is a process of winnowing out the things of your past that you don't even see are still with you. And then it takes a while to discover the significance of things in the Catholic worldview that are uniquely special compared to what it was before. So it takes a while.
Yes.
And in that light, I want to again remind the audience that, OurCatholicConversion.com. OurCatholicConversion.com. If you want to find out more about Lou's journey, go to there, and you might have some questions for Lou, more details of your journey. I do have an email here, though. I wanted to make sure we get to Janet from California. Writes, does Lou have any ideas for how Catholics can respond to Jehovah's Witnesses who come knocking at our doors? I feel bad not welcoming them to talk, but I would be at a loss for what to say if I did.
Sure. That's a great question, and I think that's something that even I, as a former Jehovah's Witness, fight with that. Even though I know that, but I think Janet is at a very good. She has a good advantage, because showing one of Jehovah's Witnesses that you're Christian, what would Christ do? A lot of times Christ didn't talk. He'd bring you in and you would sit. And I think that just being a person of Christ and showing them that respect. Once they realize that you're not going to be converted, they're not going to force you on that conversion, but you're going to prove to them, against their popular belief, that a Catholic is a Christian who firmly believes in what their faith is. They live it, and they're evidence of it by just being a true Christian. Invite them in. Have some coffee with them. Listen to them talk. Have a discussion. Show your Catholic faith to them. And the best thing to do a lot of times is to just be a Christian like Christ would. That's really the easiest way to be a witness.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, from your perspective, having had a foot in both camps, because the worldviews are so radically different, that the apologetic arguments are going to miss because they're coming from such a different perspective, that what you're saying is the qualities that transcend the two worldviews are the virtues. The virtues of charity.
That's correct.
The virtue of forgiveness, the virtue of humility. That's what we need to let them see, that an authentic Catholic Christian has these virtues.
That's right.
Because they're going to say, what are they doing with these virtues?
That's correct. That's 100% correct. And that's what will carry somebody in. That's what will bring. It may not be at that moment, but they'll remember that.
You're planting seeds.
That's right.
Another email, Jonah from Warwick writes, are Jehovah Witnesses bothered at all by the lack of historical evidence for their faith? What do they say about the huge gap between the apostles and the Jehovah Witnesses?
That's a good question too. And that was one thing I fought with. And that's why I am where I am today, because of that gap. But what they teach, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're taught that after the apostles and after they had passed on, between the apostles and Jehovah's Witnesses establishment of the Bible students by Charles Russell, that there was a dissension and just a mix-up, a mishmash of people floundering around trying to find the truth. And there wasn't a truth. They were going aside from the truth and going this way and that way. And it wasn't until this day and time that this unity began again, and we got back to the focus of faith, back to the focus of truth. So that was a learning experience, and this is the truth now. What do we talk about? What goes on in there? We don't. Yeah. We have no connection. There's nothing besides historical happenings, wars and dissensions of the church, and we use that to show the infallibility of the Catholic Church by teaching that all these dissensions happened, and that's why it's not the truth.
Yeah. I mean, that was really a common idea there in the 1800s, because not only were many dissatisfied with where the reformers had broke away from, but they were all these different groups. And so again, wiping everything clean, always going back to the Bible. This is where it was, and something's been lost. Very common thought.
Right.
We've got a couple minutes. One more email from Nikki from Kansas. Whenever Jehovah's Witnesses visit, I always feel a bit of admiration for their devotion to their faith. I really think Catholics need to do a better job of sharing our beliefs. How can we be better evangelists?
That's a great question. And there's no better way to be evangelist than to do it in what we're called to do. As an example, if you're a husband or a wife, if you're called to be a family person, that's your evangelization. Once you share and you become faithful in your family, it's going to spread to your children, etc. In your parish, in your church, get involved in helping out with things like St. Vincent de Paul, helping out the community, helping out where it's necessary, where people need it, and not helping out because people see it, but helping out because it helps, and it's because it's being Christian. Unlike, that's where I would say the parish is the way to start. You start in the parish. We serve our community, and start in your calling, whether it be in the religious life, whether it be in your family life, whether it be single life. Focus on that. Make that your ministry.
And on your job.
Living
out the virtues in that little mission field that you've been given.
The seeds that it plants are unbelievable.
All right. Thanks again, Lou. Again, your website is ourcatholicconversion.com.
Correct.
And it's just getting started, right?
It's just getting started. I mean, I've had it up for a little bit. It's a basic site, but it has links to things that might assist and help with some apologetics for Jehovah's Witnesses. It links to your sites as well. I just think that it's being part of a community. It's fairly new, but it's willing to grow. So contact me. I'm willing to share conversion stories on there as well.
All right, Lou. Well, thank you.
Thank you
very
very much. I
for coming on the
appreciate it.
program. And
Thank you.
talking about your journey, and we do ask the Lord's blessing on your continued witness
Thank you
yourself
very much.
and your family. So thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
your work. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. I mean, Lou's witness reminds us that we never know when our life, the virtues that we are called to share, might be the seed for somebody in our life to discover the beauty of our faith. And it may be that we are the one person that our Lord Jesus wants to use to bring them home to the church. So let's be a witness, each one of us. Keep each other in prayer. Look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless you.